The videos in this series have been focused on introducing Desmos as an alternative to using a graphing calculator for Math 95. However, once we get to Activity 6.4 and 6.5, we start getting into some statistical operations. And Desmos really just isn't the best tool for those. So I want to show an alternative tool that's still free, accessible on the web through smart devices, that could be used as an alternative to graphing calculators. Although StatCrunch would also be an option if that's something that you have an instructor account for. The disadvantage would be, though, that your students wouldn't be able to enter information and generate results. So in activities 6.4 and 6.5, we're asked to construct a histogram, and then there are other questions related to calculating mean, median, mode, and some other statistical summaries. Those statistical summaries, the measures of center and spread, quartiles, etc., Desmos can actually calculate, but it can't really generate histograms very efficiently or easily. So instead, what we're going to take a look at is Wolfram Alpha. If you haven't used Wolfram Alpha before, it is essentially running queries or commands through Mathematica, which is a pretty powerful piece of software. It's designed to be very intuitive in terms of the input you give it, but we do have to make sure we're kind of within reason asking for it to do the things that we want. So what I've already done is input the data that's provided for us in activities 6.4 and 6.5 that we have to work with. And then what we're going to do is just input a command in the front of this. So for instance, if we want to construct a histogram, we can just input the language histogram4 and then that data separated by commas. Click the compute or that equals button, and Wolfram Alpha will generate a histogram for us. It doesn't give us the ability to control the number of bins or the bin width, but it does give us that general output for a histogram. It's a little small, but again, it's free and quick and easy to produce. Similarly, we could change that command to something, to one of the statistical summaries that we want to calculate. For instance, we could include mean, median, or mode. Give it a second, and it will calculate the mean of that data set. It would do the same for the mode, for the median, but we'll go ahead and demonstrate the mode here. So one thing that you'll always get whenever you input anything with Wolfram Alpha is this input dialog, which is basically telling you how Wolfram Alpha is understanding that. So its own internal way of referencing the idea of mode is the commonest element, but what it's doing is essentially outputting the mode for that data set, which is 6. We could also ask for the mid-range, which is asked in one of the questions. And essentially this process just repeats. We just put in whatever value it is that we want it to calculate. For instance, or one output that will look a little bit different is the idea of quartiles. So if we want to output the first to third, or output the quartiles for our data set, we can do that by asking for quartiles, and in this case we'll get in brackets 3 separate outputs, which would represent our first, second, and third quartiles. So that would just take a little bit of understanding that output relative to what we're asking for. But then other commands like minimum and maximum would output just a single value, or if we asked for standard deviation, sometimes it takes a little longer than others. And then in this case, I actually made it a little bit unhappy because it's wanting me to clarify whether or not I want the population or sample standard deviation, which I should have thought of before I typed that in. But it's nice that it will give us this screen, and from a drop-down either let us choose population standard deviation, which is what it's showing us, or sample standard deviation. Or originally I could have typed in more specifically whether or not I want the population or sample standard deviation, since those two formulas do differ from each other. So this provides a different alternative, again freely accessible online tool to be used in place of graphing calculators.